What is the definition of loss? And what is the definition of responsibility? If we say that loss means getting deprived of something that we already have, our ideas might be reconsidered in the next book which we are about to read. And what about responsibility? We have seen a number of transgressions, a number of false moves. What about the punishments? So now that we have come to the fag end of this epic, we will now be looking at the series of punishments, retribution, and reprimands in the From the very beginning, Milton has asserted, or in fact, that is what the Bible asserts as well, that nothing is hidden from the Almighty. So, of course, Satan's act as well as Adam and Eve's act based on Satan's act is not hidden from God's view. Milton begins his 10th book focusing on the reaction of God and the reaction of angels towards this act of transgression by man. So this book opens with God and his angels. Though God knew about this deception, he had not interfered, which is kind of a reinforcement of the idea that God had given humans free will. He had warned them of the dangers. If they eat the forbidden fruit, they would face dire consequences. Despite that, they chose to ignore him. So it's like the responsibility falls on the transgressor. What about the angels? They also had a responsibility. They had the responsibility of guarding paradise. Were they successful in this? No. So obviously they were pretty worried as to what would God say now that this horrible thing has happened. So they come and they quickly return to heaven. They were concerned about their vigilance or lack of it, and they wanted to report to God. What was God's reaction? Interesting. God, with complete divine authority, established the fact that the angels should not fret over this. And he says, assembled angels and ye powers returned from unsuccessful charge, be not dismayed. So he asks the angels not to be worried or upset, nor troubled at these tidings from the earth. Tidings means news. So don't be troubled about what has happened on earth, which your sincerest care could not prevent. Foretold so lately what would come to pass when first this tempter crossed the gulf from hell. So the point is, this word foretold is very important here. So God is comforting his angels, saying that they should not fret over this thing. They should not feel any kind of regret because this event was foretold. It was supposed to have happened. Why? Because Satan had crossed the boundary of hell. Now, the point is, if the angels are not considered responsible for the fall of Adam and Eve, why does God direct all his anger to Adam and Eve? If it was foretold, and if the angels couldn't prevent it, what power did Adam and Eve have? Milton doesn't raise these questions directly, but somehow the way he places these arguments makes us feel that maybe he wants his readers to question these things in a very subtle manner. God explains to them that, see, whatever man did out of his free will, and you couldn't do anything about it. And he says that the punishment of death would soon be enforced on humans. And then we see the Son coming into the picture again. God uses his Son this time as his messenger. And he says that you go there and pronounce my judgment. And he also talks about the importance of mercy and forgiveness. the son readily accepts, and the son somehow knows that eventually he will have to take a very active role in order to help man or mankind find redemption. And this again is about, it's like a foretelling of the birth of Christ or nativity. But at this point, we do not have any Christ figure. We only have the Son as the voice of God. So, Son goes down to earth and arrives in the evening, and he is presented as a merciful judge. And he calls out to Adam and Eve, who are hiding among the bushes and the trees. Why are they hiding? Because now they are aware of their nakedness, they are ashamed of their action as well as their presence. And then we have Adam and Eve approaching because they will have to face the consequences of their actions. And somehow their looks, earlier when they approached any divine figure, they had a lot of love and anticipation. Here we find a lot of despair and even anger. When Adam is questioned about his actions, he says that it's Eve who is responsible. She had led me into this. And then the son responds like this: Was she thy God, that her thou didst obey? Very interesting statement here. So in this statement, Milton is doing two things. First, he is establishing the fact that Eve is not superior to Adam. God is. This is fine. Eve doesn't have to be superior to Adam. But the point is, here a kind of tone is established where one may feel like there is a special bond between Adam and God where Eve is not supposed to be even considered. So his folly was not to just go against God's words, but to let Eve enter into that bond of divinity which he has with God. And then the voice goes on saying, before his voice, or was she made thy guide superior or but equal? Now here the second thing comes, that Eve is not just not superior to Adam, but she is also not equal. She is established repeatedly, first through Raphael's words, then through Adam's attitude, and now directly by God's voice here through his son, that Eve was made inferior to Adam. And then it said that to her thou didst resign thy manhood, and the place wherein God set thee above her, made of thee and for thee, whose perfection far excelled hers in all real dignity. So there is a constant reiteration of the idea that Adam is made superior and Eve is just like a parasital presence, a kind of a creature born out of necessity, and therefore Adam's folly or Adam's sin is to prioritize somebody who is subordinate to him. Now what about Eve? What does she confess? She confesses that she was deceived by the serpent and ate the forbidden fruit. So in the very beginning of this class, I had talked about the definition of responsibility. So here we see there is a constant deference or rather a constant passing over of responsibility, and neither Adam nor Eve is ready to accept the fact that they too have a kind of responsibility here in their action. So Eve passes the responsibility to the serpent. Now the God's judgment on the serpent is very interesting. What do we know about the situation? The serpent was a random beast, and Satan chose the serpent because somehow he liked the shape and he felt that he could hide well inside it. But the serpent itself was just as innocent as the other creatures. Now this is where I feel very doubtful whether Milton was asking us to think about these along these lines, or he was just plain narrating the Bible? Because book 10th is strangely, it's very biblical in tone, and there are actually words copied directly from the Bible, from St. James's translation. And therefore, the Renaissance spirit, which we were seeing in some of the books, especially book 4, book 9, that is earlier, that spirit somehow looks subdued here, where the tone becomes more conservative, the tone becomes more biblical, the lines become more constricted. Okay, and see how the serpent is judged here. Upon thy belly groveling thou shalt go, and dust shalt eat all the days of thy life. I don't know how the snake moved before the fall. I don't know, maybe it was erect, it could stand up straight, because its body shape is supposed to be, like a wormy thing. And so obviously, if it had to move, it had to depend on its entire body for movement. Now, I don't know how the snake was transformed here really, but somehow it is placed as if from now onwards the snake begins to move with its entire body groveling in the dust, as if that is a kind of a punishment for it. Between thee and the woman I will put enmity. So somehow the snake is singled out as the animal who is going to be constantly in enmity with man. Now, this is a natural hatred sometimes found in people. I wouldn't say natural, but it is commonly seen that people get repelled by the idea of snakes by looking at the sight, although some people do really admire them as creatures, and they are wonderful creatures, let me tell you. But here, the snake is not treated as an animal of Eden. The snake is treated as a vessel of Satan. And what else is said here? And between thine and her seed. So a confirmation of enmity between mankind and snake kind is established right at that moment. And I don't know how the snake is at all responsible. Her seed shall bruise thy head, thou bruise his heel. It's like a vicious cycle or circle, you can say, where the snake is attacking the man and the man is attacking the snake. Now, metaphorically, you can say that the serpent represents Satan here, and it's like God is saying that mankind will be constantly at war with Satan. It will try to defeat it, whereas Satan will try to defeat man. But here we are not talking about metaphors. Here we are talking about an actual animal being subject to a judgment, in which, in this entire scenario, I don't think the snake really had much say or responsibility at that. Now, what about Eve? In Eve, we do have an active agency. Unlike the snake, which was a passive recipient, Eve is an active agent of transgression, and she is the first agent of transgression. What about Eve? What punishment is meted out to her? She gets two types of miseries allotted to her. Number one, thy sorrow I will greatly multiply, so I will increase your sorrow when? By thy conception. So you will give birth in pain. Again, I don't know, what about the other animals? Don't they have labor pain? But then it is shown as if humans have more pain in their childbirth, and that is ordained by God. Children thou shalt bring in sorrow forth. And it's not just the pain of childbirth, it's an entire series of pain, melancholia, depression, anxiety, everything together as a package of motherhood. And what about the second thing that she is going to suffer? And to thy husband's will thine shall submit, he over thee shall rule. But she was already under his rule, wasn't he? So I don't think she's getting any additional punishment here, because she was always under the rule of Adam, and she still is after her fall. She could defy then, she can defy now. So the point is, God had seen that Eve had transgressed his will. She had gone against his command. Eve has not changed. Her nature has not changed. The curiosity has not changed. The will to self-assertion has not changed. But God expects her to accept these sets of punishment as if she's not going to transgress anymore. What about Adam? Adam is punished for listening to Eve. Simple. And he is cursed. And what is his curse? In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. So in Eden they had to work. Yes, it was pleasant work, more like gardening work. But now he has to till the earth and produce crops, and it's going to be hard labor. He has to bear the brunt of the weather, the climate changes and everything. And then it said, till thou return unto the ground, for thou out of the ground was taken, know thy birth, for dust thou art and shalt to dust return. This is directly from the Bible. So it's like Adam is given a life of hard work, hardships, only to end in a dusty death. You might feel that this is kind of easier on him, and somehow God must have felt that Adam was somehow less sinful, and so he was getting less punishment. Although it is a very important thing to remember that Eve was tempted by Satan and Adam was tempted by Eve, and definitely Satan is a far stronger, far more malicious, far more capable enemy or tempter than Eve is. So I don't see why or how Eve is considered more sinful than Adam. Even in punishment, no equality is established. So why don't they die? Because they were warned that if they eat the forbidden fruit, they would die. Yes, they would die, but it won't be immediate death. They would have to go through some kind of suffering. And that was also a chance of some kind of atonement. It's like paying for your sins. The sun clothes them with animal skins, and that kind of symbolizes a protection, not just physical protection, but it's like a spiritual protection that he provides. And this act foreshadows Christ's role. When the son will be taking birth as Christ, it foreshadows the role of Christ, who offered righteousness to cover humanity, protect humanity from misery, from sin, and from hell. Now let's move on to the other part of creation. Now Milton takes us away from this entire scene to look at the characters from hell. First, we are given a glimpse into what's going on between sin and death. I hope you remember who sin is. Sin is Satan's daughter, and death is an illegitimate child born out of the union, the incestuous union between Satan and sin, father and daughter. Okay, so that is a very unholy union out of which death comes out. And sin and death, they were waiting for Satan, and somehow sin was thinking that I don't think my father is unsuccessful, because then he wouldn't have taken so long. He would have stormed back, cursing and being very angry, but he is not yet back. So I have this feeling that he is successful. And she also feels that her powers are growing. So with the original sin being executed in paradise, somehow the power of Satan's daughter sin begins to manifest itself. And she speaks to her son, O son, why sit we here, each other viewing, idly, while Satan, our great author, that is, because Satan is the source of sin as well as death, our great author thrives in other worlds and happier seat provides for us his offspring dear. So we are the dear offsprings of Satan. Both death and sin are children of Satan, although ironically death is also the child of sin. Anyway, so she is saying that why are we sitting here doing nothing while our father is working so hard to prepare such a nice place for us to thrive on. It cannot be but that success attends him. If mishap or this, he had returned. If something wrong had happened, he would have returned earlier and cursing and all, with fury driven by his avengers, since no place like this can fit his punishment. Now, she understands that if her father had gone wrong somewhere, then God's angels would again drive him back to hell, because this is the only place where he's tortured. So he has not returned, that means he is definitely successful. Methinks I feel new strength within me rise, wings growing and dominion given me large beyond this deep. I feel like my power is increasing, as I am given more region to prey on. Whatever draws me on or sympathy, or some connatural force, powerful at greatest distance to unite with secret amity, things of like kind by secretest conveyance. Look at the word secret and then secret amity. She is really hopeful for some kind of expansion of her territory. And she says, thou, my shade, inseparable must with me along. For death from sin, no power can separate. Although when we first saw sin and death, we saw like there was a very bad relationship between them. Death was torturing sin, and then those hounds were born like on her belt, tied around her waist. But here we see that a kind of a bond is created. They plan to build a bridge from hell to the new world which Satan has occupied, corrupted. Why? Because they want to have an easy passage. So they construct a massive enduring bridge over chaos, connecting hell with the earth. Now, while Adam and Eve were being judged, Satan observed everything, again disguised as an angel, and then he returns to hell, meets his offspring, sin and death, and rejoices in the successful creation of the bridge. He is very happy now that the access will help him expand his hold on humankind. After that, Satan comes back to his followers, the rebel angels who were waiting for Satan, and they were obviously very, very happy that Satan has returned. Now, you might think that, what about the gates, the adamantine gates which were so difficult to breach earlier? Now the gatesmen were also not that bothered. Everybody had gone away and Satan could easily get in. So there is again this grand assembly, because, well, Satan believes in democratic government and he believes that he needs to discuss everything with his fellows. So back in Pandemonium, the fallen angels, they are relieved and overjoyed to see their leader, and Satan again in his dazzling form. See, Satan, when he is inside hell, he achieves this glory about him, and then he addresses his fellow rebel angels and he says, look, we have a new dominion now, earth, and you can go and explore the situation there. He gives them every detail that I've done this, I've done that, I've corrupted humankind. And he says like this. So this is the speech by Satan. Him by fraud I have seduced from his creator, and the more to increase your wonder, with an apple. Now, it is nowhere mentioned in the Bible that the forbidden fruit was apple at all. In fact, it was definitely not an apple, because it was not something that is available for consumption to humans. It belonged to a particular tree, one of its kind. Now, apple trees are around everywhere, And you can't say an apple tree is a tree of knowledge. So it was definitely not an apple tree. Satan possibly uses the word apple just as a synonym of fruit. So he is kind of laughing at the stupidity of humankind, saying that it only needed a fruit to tempt them. But Milton, even in Areopagitica, he talks about the forbidden fruit being apple. So maybe he had this conception, and there was so many paintings that he had seen in his youth where that fruit possibly resembled an apple. But it is not a biblical fact. If you call Bible a fact or factual book, it is not mentioned in the Bible anywhere that the fruit is anything earthly. Anyway, Satan is calling it an apple. Let's call an apple an apple. He thereat offended, worth your laughter. So he is seeing this as a funny thing that had happened. He thereat offended, worth your laughter, hath given up both his beloved man and all his world. So Satan is looking at this entire scenario as his victory, and he is saying that God has, in a very funny way, given up his possessions, that is man, Eden, everything, because of an act done by Satan. So it's like you have something very precious in your house and a thief comes and threatens to steal it, or maybe causes some damage to it even, and the next morning you throw that thing out of your house instead of trying to repair it or simply keeping it with you because it is your thing. So here God is treating man in a certain way which Satan is finding to be very hilarious, and he's saying that he has given up his possession just because I went in too far. To sin and death a prey, and so to us. So man is now exposed to sin, to death, and to the entire host of rebel angels, so that they can go and corrupt them. Without our hazard, labor, or alarm, to range in and to dwell. So he is rejoiced because he didn't have to do a single thing. He didn't have to actually attack Eden to get into this human soul or get access to humans. It was as if given to him simply by a very easy act. And over man to rule as over all he should have ruled. True is, me also he hath judged. Now here again the point is, we have not seen the voice of God, or Son in this case, making or pronouncing any judgment on Satan specifically. He had pronounced judgment on the serpent, but Satan here feels as if he is also part of that judgment, or he's going to suffer that punishment, because whenever he goes to the world of man, he will have to take the shape of the snake. Somehow he has this idea. That's why he's saying that on me also some kind of curse is given. And what is that? Or rather me not, but the brute serpent in whose shape man I deceived. So he is also a bit confused that who did God curse, me or the serpent? But then he says, that which to me belongs is enmity, which he will put between me and mankind. So he knows that the enmity part of that sentence against the snake actually is directed against Satan. As I was telling you, the serpent represents Satan, and therefore enmity with the serpent means enmity with Satan. I am to bruise his heel, his seed, when is not set, shall bruise my head. A world who would not purchase with a bruise, or much more grievous pain. For Satan, what is a bruise? Nothing. So, for a snake, a bruise on the head means the snake would die. But Satan won't die. So, Satan is saying it's such a small price to pay for such a great achievement. What? When I am in the shape of the snake, I'll get bruises? Fine, I'll come back. I'll get into another snake. So, it's no big deal for the satanic figure. because he is totally overjoyed with the whole thing. But usually, whenever he ends his speech, there is a lot of hue and cry and celebratory applaud from people, like people clap hands and praise him. He doesn't hear anything now. And when he looks about, he sees that all around him, the rebel angels have all transformed into serpents. And they were hissing, making the sound like snakes. And he himself has also been transformed into a monstrous serpent. So he is now trapped inside the body. Although Milton could have talked about the implication of trapping a soul or trapping a spirit like Satan inside a body, whether it was at all possible or not. But it chooses not to do that, and we are simply left with this horrible image of thousands and thousands of serpents coiling, uncoiling, hissing, and a monstrous serpent among them representing Satan. So there is a degradation in their stature, there's a degradation in their appearance. Obviously, they are in despair. And their despair is made worse because now they come across, like these serpents, they are moving about and they come across a grove, a garden, where there are these amazing looking fruits and they want to eat that. And the moment they eat, it somehow vanishes and they get more and more thirsty. So it's like a kind of a reenactment of this whole idea of the forbidden fruit. And again, we see that for Satan's fault, his followers are also suffering equal punishment. So this deceptive fruit kind of mocks them and establishes the continuity of their punishment. So what about sin and death? They arrive in paradise with sin already established in a new role. Okay, because she is already initiated, they have already sinned, and death is following closely behind. Death is not yet allowed to take hold of the humans because Adam and Eve are not yet dead. Sin mocks death and kind of says that, is it even worth it? We have come so far. There are only two creatures here. Will it be worth it? And death is also not very excited. Only two humans. And he has such insatiable hunger in him. Okay, there are many creatures also, but only two humans. So this is also a kind of a foreshadowing of the fact that these two human beings will produce more human beings who would produce even more, and so death will have a constant supply of human beings. But at this moment, death is not very excited. But sin instructs death to feast on all living creatures and eventually to infect mankind. So it's like death is also postponing its attack. It's like wanting those two humans to propagate themselves, increase themselves in number, and then he would attack. But sin, she can start right away. Through corruption, destruction, and both sin and death, they set out on their missions. Meanwhile, God observes everything from heaven and he is quite aware of the upcoming corruption, destruction, plotting and everything. So what is his response? He laments. It's not that God is happy or something. He is obviously feeling very dejected and he laments the loss of his beloved paradise and especially of that set of creatures he had made after his own image. And then there is a kind of a plan of redemption too. So it's like God is thinking hard how to amend or provide a course of correction for human beings here. His primary plan is to use his son to fight sin and death. And then you might say how. One thing is that Christ's message to earth is like leading a life where you are uncorrupted and you do not submit to sin. So that is his fight against sin. What about death? We know about the story of resurrection, that Christ came out of his grave and this is how he defeated death. Therefore, God had planned that I would send my son to defeat sin and death. It took him long, but he did send. according to the Bible. And whenever God says something, the heavenly host of angels, they rejoice, they praise, and that happens. They even sing of the coming restoration through the Son, that it is the Son who will bring the new order, or a new heaven and earth would be created when the gate of hell would be sealed permanently. Now the gates are open and the rebel angels have access to earth. So God is thinking about a time in futurity when the Son would be able to seal the gates again, and then this earth would be free from the onslaught of sin and death. And the heavenly host is rejoicing, and he commands the angels to look after certain things now that the situation has changed. Earlier, the earth moved in a certain way so that the weather did not change much. Now, the situation was that climate changes were introduced, because that would mean Adam had to deal with different kinds of hardships during different times of the year. So, all these things had to be managed by different kinds of angels. So, God allocates these various kinds of work to different angels. So they would regulate the movement of the sun, the moon, other planets. They would control the weather, seasonal changes and all. And what was the impact on the world? There were these cosmic changes for which new seasonal variations were introduced. The earth was tilted to one side like it is now. And therefore it was exposed to these varying weather conditions. And what about Adam and Eve? So towards the end of the 10th book, we are brought back to our real zone of interest. Adam and Eve conversing with each other. We will try to see how they are dealing with this, how they are coping with the kind of punishments that they are given. Adam is definitely filled with lamentation, and he says, "Out of my sight, thou serpent." So now he addresses Eve as the serpent, and he thinks she is responsible for all his miseries. "That name best befits thee. With him leagued." So you have leagued with the serpent, you go with him. "Thyself as false and hateful, nothing wants, but that thy shape like his." So you should look like the serpent also. So all his ire, all his anger falls on the appearance of Eve as a beautiful creature. He doesn't want that. And then he says, "But for thee I had persisted happy." So it was because of you that I have lost my happiness. "Had not thy pride and wandering vanity," again that idea of wandering vanity. So she did something that she was not permitted to do, and because of that Adam has fallen. "When lest was safe, rejecting my forewarning, and disdained not to be trusted, longing to be seen though by the devil himself, him overweening to overreach. But with the serpent meeting, fooled and beguiled, by him thou, I by thee, to trust thee from my side. Imagined wise, I had thought that you are wise, constant, mature, proof against all assaults, that you were capable of defending against all kinds of attacks, that I thought of you. And understood not all was but a show rather than solid virtue." And then he says, "All but a rib, crooked by nature." So what is a rib? What does it look like? A rib is not a straight bone. It's not even a bone, it's a cartilage. But it's not straight, it's like crooked. So he is saying that you were made out of my rib, so naturally you are crooked. So he is connecting physical characteristic of the rib to the moral characteristic of Eve. That Eve is morally crooked because she was made from a physically crooked thing. What was Adam made of? He was made of dust. Is he as insignificant as dust? Is not. Anyway, he's trying to somehow pin the blame on her. It is evident here. And then he says, "Bent as now appears more to the part sinister from me drawn." That was the part inside me which was bad, which was evil. That was taken out and you were made out of it. This is really bad. It's like instead of saying that I am your source, you were born out of my body, so I am responsible for whatever you do. He is saying what? You were like something that was rejected by my body, like a waste material. Well, if thrown out as supernumerary to my just number found. Oh, why did God, creator wise, that peopled highest heaven with spirits masculine? So, spirits masculine. He thinks that angels are masculine spirits. Now, he has never come across a feminine angel, neither have we. Right? Female characters are so less in number. Some of the rebel angels we come across are female, and there also the idea is given that they do not have any fixed sexuality or gender, so as to say. The names of the angels like Raphael, Gabriel, all these names are very masculine, and whatever experience Adam has with divine figures, it's like they are always male voices. So he thinks that God has created these male spirits all around him. So he's saying, why the hell did he create a woman? He was okay creating male figures. Why did he create a woman? So why did God, he's now questioning God, create at last this novelty on earth, this new thing on earth, this fair defect? So he's calling Eve a fair defect. And of course he's thinking that his curse is going to affect his future generations. And he's also thinking about these things, that what about my soul? Will it continue to suffer after my death or after the death of my physical body? It's like he is living a living death. His life is like just waiting for the end. So obviously there's a lot of moral and spiritual conflict. He's tormented with guilt, and somehow he always feels horrible that everybody will say he is the source of their suffering. When his children will suffer, their children will suffer, they will all say that our grandparents, or rather Adam, had done something for which we are suffering now. Now, Eve is obviously feeling bad about the whole thing. And although Adam is cursing her like this, she understands that they need to stick together. And she says, both have sinned, but thou against God only, I against God and thee. Because it's hierarchy. So when Adam is doing something, he is answerable to God because God is superior to him. But when Eve does something, she is answerable not just to God, but also to Adam, who is placed on top of her in the hierarchy. So she is saying, I against God and thee, and to the place of judgment will return, there with my cries importune heaven, that all the sentence from thy head removed may light on me. So she is saying that it's my responsibility. So she is the one who for the first time is asserting some kind of responsibility, that I think I am to blame, and I would cry to God that I should be punished. Everything on your head must be removed and put on me. Sole cause to thee of all this woe, me only just object of his ire. This is bravery, I would say, because Book 10 is not just about passing responsibility, it is also about taking. The point is, who is taking responsibility here? Adam is so adamant. Adamant begins with Adam. That's a coincidence, I'm sure. Adam, instead of feeling good about what Eve is saying, instead of seeing the bravery in her, the courage in her to own what she has done, what he is saying? Prayers. You will go and pray that they should punish you and not me. If prayers would work, then I can pray better than you. So this is what he says. If prayers could alter high decrees, decree means order. This is the order of God, judgment of God. If prayer could change it, appeal could change it, I to that place would speed before thee and be louder heard, that on my head all might be visited, thy frailty and infirmer sex forgiven. In any way, you are weak, you are infirm, and you are frail. Frailty, thy name is woman, who said? Hamlet. Frailty is something which is associated with women. Frail means what? Of no consequence, of no strength. And because you are frail, God will not even bother punishing you. So Adam thinks that it is he who is the entire point of creation of God, and therefore the entire disappointment of God too. It doesn't matter. Eve's prayers don't matter. To me committed and by me exposed, but rise, let us no more contend, nor blame each other, blamed enough elsewhere, but strive in offices of love, how we may lighten each other's burden in our share of woe. So he does say that there's no point in going on blaming each other, because we will be blamed anyway. Let us strive in offices of love. Strive, office. Do you associate these two words with love? These two are usually associated with stern things, serious and grave, and things which we associate with suffering. Okay, strive, office, that means what? A duty. So Adam says that let us stick to our duties of love so that we can reduce this burden by being together. Eve is very clear about one thing, and she is making a very important suggestion here. She is saying that if you think your future generation is going to blame you and it's going to be horrible, then why to have children even? And she says, childless thou art. We don't have children now. Childless remain. So death shall be deceived his glut. So death will not have humans to feed on, and with us too be forced to satisfy his ravenous maw. So he would get only you and me, nothing more. So that is a way of defeating death. But if thou judge it hard and difficult, conversing, looking, loving, to abstain from love's due rites, nuptial embraces sweet. So you have to think that if we are to remain childless, we are to remain away from each other too. We cannot be sexually united. We have to abstain from union. And with desire to languish without hope, before the present object languishing with like desire, which would be misery and torment less than none of what we dread. But that will be miserable, but it will be at least a consolation that we are not providing food, like unlimited supply of food to death. At least we will have that consolation. Then both ourselves and seed at once to free from what we fear for both. Let us make short, let us seek death. Let's die right now. And that would be an end of everything. For he not found, supply with our own hands his office on ourselves. If you don't find death anywhere, let's just kill each other and invite death. Adam is not enthusiastic about this suggestion. He thinks that, no, I don't think that's a good thing, because that is again going against God in some way. Then let us seek some safer resolution, which methinks I have in view. Now Adam's point is, if we die now, what about Satan? Because God had prophesied that the serpent will be the enemy of mankind and mankind will be the enemy of serpent, and they will hurt each other, and that is the only way they can fight Satan. So fighting Satan and eventually defeating him will not be possible if they die right now. So it is like he is trying to ensure that his seeds, his future generations would be produced who will be having this power of defeating Satan. And in a way, the birth of Christ will also be made possible, although he doesn't specify any such thing. But his idea is that some kind of time is required for this defeat to come about, and maybe this is how we can counter our sin, we can act as a correction to our transgression. And he says, part of our sentence, that thy seed shall bruise the serpent's head, piteous amends, unless be meant, whom I conjecture, our grand foe Satan. So he knows that Satan, he has heard about Satan from Raphael, he is very well informed about Satan, and he knows that it is Satan who came in the shape of the serpent, who in the serpent had contrived against us this deceit, to crush his head, would be revenge indeed, which will be lost by death brought on ourselves. So, if we die now, we cannot have that chance of crushing the head of the serpent, or childless days resolved as thou proposes. So, if we do not have children, then also this will not be accomplished. So, our foe shall escape his punishment ordained, and we instead shall double ours upon our heads. So, he still thinks he is important to God. He still thinks he is an instrument through which God is going to take revenge on Satan. And he thinks that if he doesn't become that instrument of revenge, like a weapon to fight Satan, then he is going to cause more problems for himself, because God will be again angry that I asked you to bruise the Satan, the serpent, and you came back dying. So he doesn't want to somehow continue thinking about death at the moment. Another thing can be that Eve is so bothered about the future seed is because she must have felt worried about the idea of more pain during childbirth. This is something Adam would never get. This is something that Adam would never suffer. So it is easier for Adam to say that let us continue survival than for Eve, who is not yet aware of how much pain she is supposed to endure. Once you go through the process of childbirth, you know what it is about, what it is like. But till that moment, the dread, the terror, the horror, only a woman can understand that, who has not yet given birth to a child. The point is, we expect Milton to understand that as well. And if he doesn't, then we call him a misogynist. He's just being a man. This much of insensitivity is so common. Maybe not so much nowadays, thankfully. But back in his time, he would have been hardly considered misogynist at all. As the ages pass, we gain new perspectives into texts. We get more strengthened by what is happening all around us. And we ask questions that during the time a text is written, nobody thought the need to ask. So, unless we actually know how we would have behaved had we been born in Milton's time, I think we should not downright discard him as a horrible man. But it's always important to raise questions, because that keeps literature alive. We will have 2 more classes on this, Book 11 and Book 12. I hope you have enjoyed this series so far. Stay subscribed, share this with your friends. Until we meet again, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Bye-bye.